Okay, it's 1:01, so why don't we get started? So welcome everybody, and thank you for joining today's webinar on the NCPERS 2024 Public Retirement System Study and Dashboard. My name is Hank Kim, and I'm NCPERS Executive Director. Today's program is part of our Center for Online Learning, which provides remote continuing education for public pension trustees, staff, and other fiduciaries and stakeholders. In today's webinar, we will be reviewing the findings of the 2024 PRS study that we released recently. NCPERS has been conducting this annual survey since 2011. In today's webinar, we will parse the data that the study has gathered from the full vertical profile of public pensions at the state, county, and local levels. We will also have a live demonstration of the study dashboard. And this, I feel, is very unique and special to our study. It's very much a value added. Hopefully you get a lot out of it. The dashboard is a dynamic interactive platform that allows you to filter the data that the survey took in to make apples to apples comparison. Leading us in today's webinar, as he's always done, is William St. Amour. Will serves as Executive Director of Cobalt Community Research, our partner in this annual endeavor. Cobalt is a national 501c3 nonprofit that helps local governments, schools, and membership organizations affordably engage communities through high-quality data, benchmarking, and geofencing. We do encourage audience participation. Please submit your questions using the Q&A function of this platform, and we will answer your questions near the end of this session. So with the introduction out of the way, Will, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Hank. Let me switch over so everyone can see my screen. I appreciate the opportunity to share this information once again. Just a little bit of background on myself as I click around to keep you all distracted. My prior life, I was pretty extensively involved with public retirement. I spent many years with the Municipal Employee Retirement System of Michigan, where I was the research director. And then also I spent a significant amount of time with the Office of Retirement Services, working with public schools and state police and the state employees and all of those types of systems as well. So let me get into the presentation itself. And we already talked about Cobalt and who we are and what we do. One thing I would like to point out is that we're headquartered in Charlotte, Michigan. So for those of you who are in warmer climes, it's a little chilly out here, and I know that always warms your heart to hear. So this is the 13th year of this particular study. We work to explore public sector retirement practices. We want to analyze the data and look to see what it is that's going on in the pension community, to identify best practices and strategies, to see what's going on, not only for our own internal use for all of us, all of the retirement systems, but also to make sure that we have the most up-to-date information so we can tell our story more effectively and more completely to the public. So our methodology, as in past years, we conducted this in September through December of 2023. This was done by email, multiple reminders, and some of you probably received multiple reminders. So we appreciate you taking the time to fill out the survey and give us your information. We heard back from 157 retirement funds, and very importantly, there were 115 of those that responded both this year and also last year. And that's helpful because it gives us really a good apples to apples comparison from the same cohort, so we can measure those kind of differences. While it's really useful to see the overall results from the 157 folks, depending on the mix of the 157, the results might skew one way or the other, just depending on who happens to respond. But by having this core of folks that respond year after year, we're really able to zero in on some of those specific changes. So looking at respondents, folks were from state and local governments. There was a total of 13.8 million participants represented in the results, and the assets under management exceed 2.3 trillion. About 42% of the funds that responded were local funds of some sort, so city funds, county funds, and so on, and about 48% were statewide funds of some sort. When we look at the types of individuals that these funds represent, we can see in 2022 what that particular mix was. Very similar for 2023, although we saw a little bit of a flip In terms of the percentage of folks in public safety, it was 45, now it's 54. And we can see for the township and village, that changed a little bit as well, went from 52 to 48. Returns, they were a little bit softer than what we've seen in other years. So reporting fund saw on average 1-year returns around negative 1.9%. The 5-year, 10-year, and 20-year averages, though, were a little lower than last year, but the 10 and 20-year averages were above the assumed rate of return, which is an important note to keep in mind. These funds also reported in last year's, that reported both last year and this year, saw similar patterns, although that cohort saw on average 1-year returns that were more around negative 1.2%, so a little bit better than the group overall. Real estate and other alternatives had the best 1-year returns. So as you dive into the report, you can see that by asset class. It is important to note that not all responding funds have the same fiscal year-end date, and the very timing of responding funds' fiscal year ends accounts for a significant share of the difference in the investment experience between funds. For example, funds that have a December fiscal year-end date saw 1-year returns of about negative 9.9%, and those that had a June fiscal year-end date saw 1-year returns of about 3.5%. The average investment smoothing period for respondents increased from 5.2 to 5.7 years compared to last year's survey. The distribution of responding funds on the graph shows the majority have a smoothing period of 5 years or shorter. So you can see, 5-year line, a lot of folks right in there. Oops, right in there. And you can see that the average also moved a little bit compared to last year. So for those funds that have Social Security eligible members, the smoothing period was a little bit longer. It was 5.9 years. Those who are not Social Security eligible have an average smoothing period of 5.0 years. So a little bit of a difference on those two cohorts. Diving into the asset allocation, the asset allocation is similar to last year, but we can see a slight decline in the global equity up here at the top. And we can see an increase in private equity, which is down here. And you can see some movement in some of these other areas as well. And just for clarity, the gray is 2022, the blue is 2023, and you can get a lot more detail on this both in the report and in the portal itself. Looking at oversight practices, overall, responding funds showed very similar practices compared to the prior year. Approximately 2/3 conduct an actuarial evaluation at least every 2 years, and they have boards that have adopted investment policies and or written fiduciary standards. About 63%, we wanted to mark that here on the slide, of the funds reported receiving the full actuarial contribution for last year. This is actually up quite a bit. It was 57% in 2022. So it's good to see that bump in terms of the funding. The average total expense for all respondents to administer their funds and also to pay their investment management fees is 56 basis points. You can see that right here and what that distribution looks like. And 100 basis points equals 1 percentage point for those of you who aren't familiar with that. This is below the 64 basis points in the prior year. So we dropped it about 8 points. According to the 2023 Investment Company Factbook, the average expense of hybrid funds is 59 basis points. So that tells me that the universe of public retirement funds, they're a bit more efficient than the private sector is. The investment manager expense was also significantly lower than last year. You can see that maybe here in the bottom line, you can see it's 39 basis points, and it was 49 basis points in the prior year. Administrative expenses here, the 17 was about the same compared to prior years. And I suspect the investment basis points was lower in part because of the investment performance last year. Looking at the overall cost of living adjustments. So the aggregated average COLA offered to members was 2.2%, which is slightly higher than the 2.0% that we saw last year. Many responding funds did not offer a COLA in the most recent fiscal year. And you can see those folks kind of stacked up here on the bottom. Funds with members who are not eligible for Social Security tend to offer higher COLAs, about 2.7%. And those with members who are eligible for Social Security offered about 1.9%. Funds with populations smaller than 10,000 participants also had an average COLA that was a little bit higher than what we saw for the larger funds by about 0.25%. Looking at the amortization period for responding funds, that period currently averages 20.4 years, and that's down a little. It was 20.8 in the prior year, last year. Funds that also participated in the survey last year and this year saw a reduction in their average amortization period by about 0.4 years. So we continue to see this kind of downward pressure on how long those liabilities are smoothed. Overall, the percentage of closed and fixed funds also increased. So that went from 70% to 75% overall. So that means that the open funds, the ones that are continuously rolling on a 20 or 30-year basis, those are a smaller and smaller share of the respondents for this year. Looking at confidence, surveyed funds were asked, how satisfied are you with your readiness to address retirement trends and issues over the next 2 years? Respondents provided an overall confidence rating of 8.0 on a 10-point scale, and very satisfied equals 10. So this is slightly higher than the 7.8 last year. So this continues to be something that's been growing over time as we've been pursuing this particular set of questions. Funds responding both years, so last year and this year, were slightly more confident in their ability to adapt to and address these issues in this volatile environment. Overall, the average confidence for that particular cohort increased from 8.2 to 8.2 from 7.9. The last bit of data that I wanted to talk to is for the environmental, social, and governance factors. They were asked about the role of these factors in their investment decisions. About 46% of respondents said that they are somewhat or very important to their investment decisions. And you can see those two bars here. And that's actually down from last year where we had 54% in these two particular categories. So that is the quick nickel tour of some of the highlights of the results. What I'd like to do now is just pop over and give you a quick walkthrough of what that portal looks like, so that as you go around and play with it, you have a better sense of how to navigate it and how to get the functions to behave the way that you'd like them to behave. So when you land on the page, you end up here, and there are a couple of ways to navigate. First of all, you can use these various tabs across the top to get to the different sections of the portal. You can go back and forth using these little carrots on the side, or over here, there's a little down button. You can click on that, and that gives you all of the various options and a little bit more cohesive space. So this is giving you the key findings when you first land here on this page. You can then click over and look at who responded, and this will start getting you into some of the dynamic information. And I'll show you how to filter that in just a minute. So you can see here plan type, what kind of employees retirement types retiree types are covered. We can look at the fiscal year of the CAFR or ACFR, eligible for Medicare, eligible for Social Security, and so on. So lots of different information. So here on this first tab, you can see prior year participant, yes or no. This is where you can filter between seeing the results for everyone or just looking at those folks that responded both last year and this year. And the way that you do that essentially for all of these is you click off the things you do not want. So for prior year participant, if you want to see only the folks who responded both last year and this year, you click off the no. So that's all that remaining are the folks who say, yes, they're a prior year participant. And you can see what that cohort looks like. And you can click it to set it back. You can look at individual response years. So we have 2022 and 2023. If you click on them both at the same time, you're going to see that the numbers are actually summed up a little bit. So we want to just click one at a time to look at those. You can select whether the plan is Social Security eligible. You can also select based on the number of participants. So are you a small plan of under 10,000? Are you 10,000 to 100,000? Are you 100,000 or more? And again, click off the ones that you don't want. The little null here for those who didn't respond to that particular question with the number of participants. The last thing that I wanted to point out for these particular filters is the type of employee or beneficiary that's covered. So if you wanted to look just at public safety, for example, you want to see all of the funds that have public safety members in them, then you go over here to where it says public safety and you click off the no, so that all that's selected is the yes. And you can see 100% of public safety folks are now showing up in this particular graph. Now, this is public safety, but it's also plans that have public safety and others. So maybe it has public safety and state employees, public safety and county employees. If you just want pure public safety without any of these other groups mixed in who might also be covered by a fund that does public safety, then what you want to do is you want to make sure you're clicking off the local folks, the county folks, and on down the line. So that allows you to just purely see the folks who say yes to public safety and no to any other groups. And after you're done, re-click so that you can see everything going forward or whatever you'd like to see in the other tabs. So continuing on, we see fund practices. So this is looking at the ESG that we talked about, allowing board members to call and vote via conference call or video call. We've seen this grow significantly since COVID years, and whether or not the overtime is included in the benefit calculation. And you can see that 44% say yes and 56% say no. Fund confidence, we looked at this particular chart a few minutes ago. You can filter that out in different ways to give you your apples to apples comparison. The expenses, same sort of thing. We looked at this particular graph. You can filter it in all the different ways that you'd expect, along with what those basis points are for these two groups. When you do the filters, these two numbers do not necessarily equal the total average expense level, because some folks may not have included administrative basis points, or they may not have included investment basis points. So sometimes the sum of those are a little bit off, whereas this just sums everything together. We have economic assumptions that you can take a look at. So looking at investment returns, inflation assumption, smoothing period. We can look at the amortization again that we saw, as well as the type of amortization period. And then we can look at various trends. So looking at 2023 to 2022 and what some of those differences look like. Those who are already offering some of these particular benefits or currently practicing a particular practice, and those who are considering doing so. And again, with all of the various filters. The oddballs are for the tabs that are dealing with investments. And let me pop over to those real quick. So if we look at investment returns, for example, we can see what those look like. But we do have a new option over here, which is fiscal year end. So if you wanted to look just at the folks with December returns or with June returns, you can click off the all and then select just that particular month that you're interested in, and that will repopulate. The other strange one is in the investment asset allocation. So when we go over to this particular tab, we see again fiscal year end as an option, but we have these two sliders as well. And what these allow you to do is look at the allocation for folks based on their returns. So right now, you've got the full range of returns, and you can slide this over. So if you want to look at just folks that had a positive return, you can click on that, and you can see those particular asset allocations change. These asset allocations too, this is a long list. So you actually need to grab hold of this little slider bar and slide on down to see everything. Lastly, we have a few word clouds in here. The words that came up most often are the ones that are the largest, but if you click on this, it'll actually pull up a Word document where you can actually read verbatim what people said. So this is true for the investment asset classes. Also, when we go to the best practices tab, we've got kind of a summary of what those are, and you can click on those so you can read through those ideas on your own to see if you get you can get some ideas of things that you can rip off and duplicate from your peers. So that is the quick tour of the portal itself. To get back to the beginning, you can just go over here, click on introduction again, and you're back. So now to go back to the PowerPoint presentation, we'll continue from where we left off. Available tools. So the full report is available on the NCPERS website. We do have the interactive board available to members, and so that's something that you can get. There's a login required, so you'll need to contact NCPERS for more information. But at this point, I would like to pause and answer questions that the group may have. And I believe that there are some questions that were sent ahead of time that we may be able to talk about as well. So Hank, I'll hand it over to you.
Great, thank you, William. No, that's fantastic. Before we answer the questions that were submitted live today, as well as that were submitted prior, one of the things that I wanted you to talk about, William, is relative to the dashboard. For those of you who may want to make a presentation, about, the survey and some of the data sets that was collected in the survey. William, like when you do those filtering, or even if you don't, if there is a particular set of data that you wanted to include, some of those can be, or all of them can be downloaded from Tableau, right? In some sort of an image format that then you can stick into your PowerPoint presentation. William, you're muted.
There are a couple of ways that you can do that. One is if you right click on the chart, I believe it gives you an option for downloading. Also, pretty much any PC has, let me sneak out of here real quick, a particular app called Snippet. That is something that we use a lot. And that particular snipping tool allows you to just basically click on something, highlight it, and you can grab a high resolution copy of it. And that's a pretty easy way of grabbing things too. Because what we see sometimes on the portal is that things are a little bit pixelated. And so using this particular tool can be a nice way of getting a better quality image off it.
Yeah, so we want you to be, fully aware of all the functionality and the options and benefits of going onto the dashboard. The printed static PDF or printed version that you get is great. But if you want to actually see it in a more dynamic fashion, we highly encourage you to go on our dashboard on our website. Fool around with it, do the filters, because I think you can get some really rich and interesting data. And then again, if you have presentations that you want to make, or if you have specific points you'd like to highlight, again, those filter data can be grabbed and imported into your PowerPoint presentation. All right, so William, let's go into some of the questions. Wait a second. All right. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out okay. So one question is, are the multiple year return compounded returns, or the arithmetic average of 1 year returns?
They are 1 year returns. Well, I'll take that back. For the 1 year returns, they are 1 year returns. If we look at the multiple year returns, here, these are compounded.
Great, thank you. And while you're still there, can you go to slide 10? And you might want to put it into full presentation mode. So the question is, why do the totals on slide 10 not add up to 100%?
So the answer is not everyone responded to every question. So this is the percentage of respondents. If we had not a play or no response, then that would make up the difference, but that would eat more real estate. So we didn't include those.
Right. Thank you. Next question is, investment expenses in basis points seems low. Does it reflect, for example, the private assets charging 2 and 20? If a plan has 30% of assets being charged 2% per year, that alone would be 60 basis points of the plan as a whole.
So the basis point, this is self-reported data. So it depends on how the plan reported it essentially. So I suspect there's a fair mix. This should have included all of the expenses related to investments, so manager fees and hidden fees and so on. But we do ask this question consistently the same way every year. So even though there may be a bit of a mix in terms of what people include or what they don't include, there should be a pretty stable response pattern year over year. So like with any survey, you're always going to have a certain amount of bias or error. But if you can keep that bias or error consistent year over year, then when you're measuring that change year over year, you're actually getting a pretty decent measurement of the change.
Great. Another question is, what was the average funding ratio for these plans?
That we can grab off the portal itself. So when we hop on out there, and we can go to funding levels. And so the average funding level was around, make sure I don't have any weird clickers set up. Always check your filters, folks. Looks like it was around 70%.
Next question, is there an appetite to explore various pension features and which systems take advantage of, parentheses, and which systems take advantage of them, close parentheses, in future surveys, for instance, PLSEA, deferred retirement plan, deferred retirement payouts, employee contributions, vesting, etc.
There are a number of things that we include in the survey each year, looking at some of those types of provisions. And I think really, if you've had ideas that you think this is a trend that's building, let NCPERS know. And then every year when we sit down and start looking at what do we put into the survey, we can add those in. We're always careful not to put in too much into the survey to make it too painfully long. But as things, there are some things that people really just don't do that often. And if there's something that's trending that you think we should start measuring, then by all means, share those ideas, because you know what's happening. You've got all the innovation going on there in your individual offices. So we want to know about it. And if it's something that others can learn from, then absolutely bring it on.
And William, if you're back on the portal, can you put up the employee contribution slide or the tab? Because we certainly have that one.
So we have a couple of different measures, overall sources of revenue and the percentage of payroll. So when we're looking at the sources of revenue, we can see member contributions are about 10%. And when we look at member contributions as a percentage of payroll, that also just happened to be 10% as well.
Great, thank you.
And we can look at it
Go ahead.
compared to 22 as well. So if we click on 22, then you can see, the comparison. So the member contributions actually went up by 1 percentage point from 22 to 23. And employer contribution rates went up more substantially.
Next question. How do these results compare versus the Boston College Center for Retirement Research public plan database? What does this add to the CCR database?
I can't really speak to that because I haven't looked at their data lately. I believe their methodology is different and relies more significantly on CAFRs. So I think their data is a little bit older than ours is. So I don't know if someone on your side might have looked at that more recently and can speak to it with a bit more depth.
Yeah, I mean, I think I generally agree. I think the CCR database is more of a passive approach. Yeah, as you said, collecting data from the annual reports. You know, so I don't think this survey, adds to or influences the CCR reporting. I think, what the advantages of this, well, of both, quite honestly, but in particular ours is I think we get our data fairly quickly. So it is a little bit more timely versus the lag that is generally in the Boston College one. I think we could get as I mentioned, the full vertical profile of, state, county, and local plans. But I think both are very valuable. I think the more data that public plans have, more data that, trustees and fiduciary of public plans have access to. And, as importantly, the public, the policymakers, and the media get access to that, to the extent that our survey mirrors the trends that the CCR data is picking up, all the better, because I think more data, more research in public pensions to dispel some of the misnomers, misunderstanding of public pensions is good for the community.
I think that's exactly right. One other wrinkle that this one adds, though, that the others don't, is that we have a number of questions that are just looking at what are some of the practices, things that may not show up in the CAFR at all. So things like, what are you doing with oversight practices? Yes or no? Looking at communications, what are some of your capabilities? Looking at business practices, what have you already implemented? What are you considering implementing? So these things add a bit more depth and a bit more perspective, especially when you start tying in some of the verbatim comments that come in terms of, what kind of crazy ideas have you come up with to reduce your liabilities or business practices of some sort. There's some gold in these here hills that you may not be able to glean from some of these other reports.
Next question is what percent plans have private equity and or private credit, and what percent in PE and private credit? I'm not sure if our data captures all that, but we can certainly show private equity and private credit, right?
We can. So when we dive into, let me go into the asset allocation. So we do have some perspectives on those. So private equity, private debt. Just kind of scroll through for those of you who have good eyes can see it on the screen. We do cover a wide variety of assets. Now we also have an other category where you can then dive in here to see what other things people are working on that may be working well for them.
Right.
We don't necessarily know.
Yeah.
We can pull from the raw data if necessary the number of folks who said zero or just left it blank for some of those categories. So we could get a read on it that way, but it's not included in this particular report or on the dashboard.
Next question. My pension fund uses net of fee returns, and we responded as such in the survey. Is there a net of fee tab in the portal or only gross returns?
That is an excellent question. So we do have the ability to filter by net and gross, although I do not think it's in the filter. So that's something that we'll have to look at adding in. It's a good question.
Yeah, great question. We will, so we have that data. We will incorporate that into, can we make that change effectively on the fly, William?
We can, yeah.
Yep. So yeah, come back to the dashboard. Give us maybe about a week or so, and we will update it so that there will be a filter for gross and net of fees. Excellent question. Thank you. All right, next question. 60% had unqualified audit opinions. What did the other 40 have?
So let me go over and look at the oversight practices. The other ones simply didn't respond yes. So we have, let's see, I'm looking over here at the audit, I believe it's here. I'm not running it right off the bat, but if they said yes and then there was not an answer, it was either no or they just simply didn't respond to the question.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, if we were a participant, is there an easy way of identifying our data point on your graphs? I think the answer is no. Yes.
We keep these anonymous, although if you would like your own individual results, we certainly have them. So it's just a matter of requesting that and we'll send you back what your results were.
Yeah, but we generally tend to keep this in the aggregate. We want to keep it anonymous to encourage, frank submission and encourage participation in the annual surveys. All right, there's is there another question? I think those were the ones that came in. So again, if you have additional questions, please use the portal to the Q&A function of the Zoom, and we will be happy to answer your question. Oh, yeah, we got some more. Give me a second. Let's see, what did I leave off? Did you have any open-ended questions?
We did. So we had an open-ended question regarding the investment allocation as far as what other types of investments folks are making. And then we also had a couple of questions over here on the last tab. One is looking at strategies that you put in place to reduce your unfunded actuarial liability, or an innovation or best practice that you'd like to share with others in the community. So both of those are open-ended, and then you can click on these word clouds to get the full verbatim comments.
Great. Next question. In the 17 basis point cost for administration, what type of things are included? Admin staff salaries, real estate costs for office, admin office, IT costs, fees for third-party pension software, or fees for paying a third-party administrator, as examples. Anything else significant?
The answer is yes, all of those things, and we have a frequently asked questions tab that is on the landing page for this particular project, which is cobaltcommunityresearch.org/NCPERS. And if you click on that, there's some instructions on what to include in these different questions, including what to include for both admin and investment costs. And I think it's also on your website. I think I saw it on there for this particular page too.
Yep, and we just put it on the, I think in the chat, the link to that frequently asked question portion. All right. So some of the questions that we got previously include trends regarding in-house investment, trends regarding in-house investment management. What asset classes? So I think largely that's kind of outside the scope of our survey, right, William?
It is, although I believe we touch on it with the compensation survey. So that might be something that folks want to take a look at. First year we did kind of the C-suite, looking at those responsibilities and which things were done internally and which were done externally. This past year we did it on mid-level folks. And so there were a number of positions dealing with various investment positions and portfolio leads. So that's something that you may want to take a look at. That'll give you a bit more insight into those.
Yeah, and again, that survey, which is somewhat of a companion to this survey, is available on our website at, yep, it's just been posted at ncpers.org/surveys. Again, this isn't data driven, it's more qualitative of a response, but in terms of in-house management, the trends I've noticed are particularly for really the largest of public sector plans. They tend to bring some of the investments in-house, particularly for more straightforward investments like fixed income, maybe large public equities. As the trend of, as we saw in the survey of going into alternatives and private markets, those generally tend to be done with external managers. So I think that's my sort of qualitative or anecdotal response to the question of trends in in-house investment management.
I think cash also tends to be internal.
Yes. Yep. What do you see as the biggest challenges pension funds will have to making? Wait, excuse me. What do you see as the biggest challenges pension funds will have to making moving forward from a funding perspective? William, I'll give my 2 cents on this, and if you have any color,
Sure,
love
sure.
to hear it. So I think one of the things that was highlighted in this survey and a number of others is the contribution from employers. I think the biggest key for fully funding a pension plan, and the number of different studies have shown it, that the easiest and the best way to have a fully funded plan is to get full contribution. So I think contributions begins certainly the conversations about challenges about pension funding perspective. I think after that, there are a number of actuarial changes and particularly relative to demographics that will be challenges. And then of course always the markets. So those are sort of my three sort of the three horsemen, I guess. The making sure the contributions, getting the contributions is always, is a challenge. If you're not getting it, is a challenge. The actual and demographic assumptions and the markets. Any additional color?
From my perspective, the thing that's always kept me awake at night is longevity. So we haven't had any huge jumps in terms of longevity for a while, but there's a lot of things on the horizon that could significantly change life expectancy. And that obviously would have a huge impact on funding levels. So thinking about things like your retirement age, is it, a static age that's set in statute, or is it something that can be adjusted? That's something that might be worth looking at. Then from a market perspective, things that I'm worried about is China. How sustainable are they? Is there going to be some unpleasant corrections that go on in the international market as uh, China may not be as prosperous as it has been in future years. And then looking at commodities, and as we're dealing with changes in shipping around the world, changes in demand, electrification, so electric cars and the kind of materials that are required to make that transition happen. These are all things that could have a significant impact on your market returns and then in turn your funding.
Yep, great points. Let's see. Next question is, what is the average cost allotted for stakeholder communications? Are communications created in-house or through consultants? I don't, well, so again, let me start with some of the research that we did. And again, William, if you have any insight or perspective, love to hear that as well. So as listeners may know, NCPERS has a number of different roundtables for professionals at pension plans. One of the roundtables is the communications roundtable, and this is for those professionals at pension plans who have communications as part of their duties or their exclusive duty. And so we quickly asked them this question about communications budgets, and very limited response, but the average annual budget for stakeholder communications is roughly $350,000. The average communications budget is just over 900,000, 912,500. Of the limited respondents, there were only 5, only 20% use external consultants. So that's the answer. William, any additional thoughts or comments?
I do. So my master's happens to be in communication and communication evaluation. I don't have any data on the cost that retirement funds are spending on it. We do have some information in terms of communication capabilities that you can take a look at, see, are you up to speed? If you're not up to speed with some of the key things, then maybe an investment there could make sense, particularly since there's lots of funds doing some of these practices that you can, rip off and duplicate what they're doing less expensively than coming up with it on your own. Also outbound communication, what are the primary and secondary channels that people are using for communication? That's another guide for you to kind of grade yourself of, are you above or below? So based on your current spending, should you increase it or decrease it? More generally with communications, one of the things that I tend to think about is, what is the cost of not communicating well? And have you done a strategic communications plan, thinking about who are your key stakeholders and really getting a good handle on how well you communicate with them? So your various reporting units. So making sure that you've got a tight process with them, because if things go sideways with them, you've got a lot of problems. Members certainly is an important group to look at, certainly your largest group in terms of the cost of producing stuff. But then also thinking about your legislature, and are there other stakeholder groups that you want to keep close? And all of those are communication kind of muscles, whether it's someone who's actually in a communications role or a legislative liaison or some sort of other kind of outreach role. Uh, those are folks really you want to have that capability in-house because bad things can happen if you let that get out of control.
Great, thank you, William. Next question that we got was, how much are you seeing, or how much are we seeing plans rethink or revisit the plan changes from 2010 through 2013? So again, more anecdotal and qualitative from me. No, I don't, I'm not really seeing too much revisions into, or, looking back to, modify the changes that were made, after the great financial crisis. What I can say is there are a number of states that have closed its DB plans to public employees, looking to reopen them. The most prominent being up in Alaska, where the legislation to reopen the DB plan for Alaska public employees passed the Senate chamber of the Senate in the Alaska legislature. Obviously, it still has to go through the House, and then if it makes that be signed by the governor, both major hurdles, but it is the first time since Alaska closed its plan in 2006 that a legislation has actually passed one chamber of its legislature. So that seems very promising. So that's, sort of my qualitative answer. William, any thoughts from your end, more on
Just a couple of thoughts as I've been out working with a lot of local units of government. They have been struggling to attract qualified staff. And so certainly a pension or some kind of robust pension or retirement benefit can be a huge advantage to them. But the balancing point is affordability. So over the last 15 years, retirement systems have been very focused on looking at reducing their liability. And part of that, when they change their assumptions and amortization, might result in higher contributions from the employers. And so that's something that I think is starting to get a little bit more pressure against it and finding ways of making the plan a little bit more affordable. Still funding it fully, but maybe thinking about, is it the right amortization period? Do you have the right, are you being a little bit too conservative with some of your assumptions? Are things that are worth thinking about, particularly as local governments, they have a high turnover, they probably have a 50% turnover every 5 years. How can they attract, if not the best and brightest, the brighter and bester folks that can come in and work for them? So it is a broader systemic thing to think about, and just looking at the liabilities may be an incomplete picture to think about in that strategy.
So we got a couple more questions. And well, I'm not sure if the data would shed any light on this, but let me ask anyway. What are the projections for allocations of global private credit, particularly outside the United States, the US market?
That I can't speak to.
Yeah, I'm not, sorry, I'm not entirely sure about that either. And probably in the same category, what asset classes do you see having active mandates in 2024? No, the
Yeah,
data doesn't
I'm
really
not sure
inflect
about
that.
active mandates. Certainly, if we're looking at things that I suspect are going to move, commodities are going to be something that I think we'll see a lot of action on, but it's above my pay grade.
Yep. Last question is, why are ESG factors playing less important roles in investment decisions last year over the year before?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think part of it is looking at, as a fiduciary, do you make your decision on getting the best possible return for the folks that you're a fiduciary for, or do you have a broader responsibility to the planet, for example? And so I think that there's there's a push and then there's a push back on the other way. You've got this pendulum going on, and I think that's what you're seeing. So last year we just had a little bit more push toward kind of that responsibility side. And now we have folks saying, yes, I'm responsible. I don't want to follow things up, but I have a higher duty to the members that I'm supposed to be a fiduciary for. And so that's probably a little bit of the counter pressure that you're seeing.
Right. Well, that ends the Q&A portion. William, I want to thank you very much for being our partner in this annual endeavor and joining us today to explain the report as well as demonstrating the dashboard. We appreciate that very, very much. And to everybody who's tuned in, hopefully you found this session to be educational and informative. And we wish you a good week. Thank you so much, William.
My pleasure. Take care, everybody.
Take care. Bye-bye.